Okay, we're going to start with verse 43, and this is immediately after Pentecost and what is happening after that. And then it says in verse 43, and fear came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were done by the apostles. The reason why the apostles were given this ability to do signs and wonders, basically miracles, was to validate their writings. Jesus had just died and ascended. And so these Jews, these people, they were familiar with Jesus doing miracles, but they probably thought, hey, when he died, it's all over. Mm-hmm. But now the apostles are doing miracles. And we're not told in this verse right here exactly what miracle it was. And then verse 44, and all that believed were together and had all things in common, and sold their possessions and goods, and distributed them among all men as every man had need. So they were living communally. And I'm going to read what my Bible says about that. It says, communal sharing was practiced for a brief time by the early church, but not throughout Acts. These believers were expecting the very soon return of Christ. And they therefore sold their possessions. This did not last. Such communal life is not taught by the apostles. Rather, we are taught to be good stewards of that which God has given to us. Anyway, my point is, this isn't God's teaching for us to live in a commune type. Mm-hmm. They did this voluntarily, and I want to ask you a question. Let's say you all knew for sure that Christ was going to return next Monday. What would you be doing this week?
Praying and thanking God.
Yeah. What else?
And trying to get all my family. Telling everyone.
Telling people. You may even sell some things that you have and give them to missionaries. You may. Right. They had this sense of urgency from what Peter had just said. So they're like, he's coming back immediately. So that's why they just sold everything. Mm-hmm. That's why they acted this way. Verse 46, and they continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, and did eat their meat with gladness and singleness of heart. That breaking bread means that they're taking communion. Mm-hmm. But there's something just a little bit curious about why they're in the temple all the time, because when you think about it, the temple hadn't changed, and the religion at the temple hadn't changed. They were still giving sacrifices. Everything was going on just as it was. So what you have to understand is these apostles were newborn. They didn't know everything. They were newborn in the faith. They were like babies in the faith, right? So they were still keeping the law. And all the apostles did. They were still keeping the law. They felt like Judaism was just now coming to its fruition, and now they could keep the law, and they'd be the best Jews, and they'd have Christ. They thought they could have it all. And so what did Jesus say? Go to the Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and to the uttermost parts of the earth. So right now, they're testifying in Jerusalem. And maybe when they go to the temple, they're wanting to witness. I mean, that's Jerusalem. Verse 47, they were praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to the church daily as were being saved. So the Lord was adding to the church. Chapter 3. Now Peter and John went up together into the temple at the hour of prayer, being the 9th hour. So they're still keeping the law. They're going to the temple at the hour of prayer. What happened at this point in time was that the priest would make a sacrifice, and then he would offer prayers and offer incense on the golden altar of incense. So all the people, and there'd be a big crowd out there praying. They were praying as a priest was in there praying. So this was part of the Jewish religion. They were not willing to give up the religion of their fathers until God finally said, Paul, listen to me. I'm going to talk to you for a couple of years. And he spent 3 years in the Arabian desert. And you know what's in Arabia? Mount Sinai.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very possible that this was a portal. This was a place where he came to meet God. And God instructed him. And then he, in turn, instructed the rest of the apostles that we don't need the law. We only need the Spirit. And in Acts 15, they end up having a little powwow about this whole thing. In this verse 1 of chapter 3, we have Peter and John going to the temple together. And when you look in the history of Peter and John, before they even met Jesus, it says that they were together on the Sea of Galilee. They were partners in their fishing business. They shared their boats, and they had this business before they ever met Christ. So they were already friends. And it talks about the sons of Zebedee, which was John and James. But I wanted to tell you about some of their partnership. So they were the inner core of the circle of disciples. Like at the Transfiguration, he took James and John and Peter. Then at the Last Supper, John was sitting right next to Jesus. And when Jesus said someone was going to betray him, Peter makes all these signals to John. Hey, ask him who it is. See, Peter and John have this long-time friendship, and it continues. At the raising of Jairus' daughter, they were together. And then in the garden, when Jesus was praying, it was James and John and Peter. Remember, they fell asleep. He says, can't you just stay awake a little while I go a stone's throw away and pray? Well, they couldn't. They're only human. But they were together. When they captured Jesus and took him to Caiaphas' palace, Peter and John followed. John went into the palace and Peter stayed out and warmed himself by the fire. But those are the only two disciples that went. When Christ rose from the grave and the women came and told the story, John and Peter are the ones who ran to the sepulcher to see that. And then at the Sea of Galilee, you'll remember we just talked about this. When he appeared at the Sea of Galilee and gave them that whole draught of fish out there, and then Jesus had this little private conversation with Peter, the man who had denied him 3 times. And Jesus asks him 3 times, lovest thou me? But after that conversation, he had taken Peter kind of off to the side. Guess who was following? John. And that's when Peter said, well, what's this man going to do? Because I never understood before that, hey, that was his best friend. And he's wondering. And Jesus basically says, it's none of your business. Okay, now we're going to get to the first miracle that's documented. Now, a certain man, lame from his mother's womb, was carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple, which is called Beautiful, to ask alms of them that entered into the temple. So we find out in Acts 4:22 that this man was above 40 years old. So I want you to think about that. He would have been there when Jesus went to the temple. Remember, Jesus went to the temple 3 times a year. This man would have been there begging. Remember one time at the Feast of Tabernacles when he healed that blind man? I'm telling you, this news would spread like wildfire, especially among the people who had physical problems, right? So, and then him always being there at the door of the temple, at that gate, he would hear all this commotion, and Jesus would be going there 3 times a year, and he would go into the temple. Why didn't Jesus heal him? Got to wonder about that. Well, maybe he never asked to be healed. Or maybe it was for them these guys to heal him.
Right.
But even here, we're going to discover he never asks to be healed. Who, seeing Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asks them for alms. So he's basically a beggar. And Peter, fastening his eyes upon him with John, said, "Look on us." So he wants to get this guy's attention. This guy's busy, you know. Can you give me something? Can you give me something? And he's going, "Hey, look at me. I want to talk to you." And he fastened his eyes on him. Then Peter said, "Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have give I thee. In the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, rise up and walk." I just said about Jesus going there 3 times a year. And when they say, "In the name of Jesus of Nazareth," this man knew who they were talking about. I mean, it was just a month and a half before that Jesus was crucified. The whole town knew what was going on. Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, was written above the cross in 3 languages. And then him rising from the dead. I mean, this was big news. So this guy absolutely knew who Jesus of Nazareth was. There's no way you could live in Jerusalem and be right at the temple gate and not know who Jesus was. So he did know. And Peter, he took him by the right hand. Remember the right hand? It's always the right one, right? He took him by the right hand and lifted him up. And immediately his feet and ankle bones received strength. Now the fact that this is mentioned, that it was his ankle and his feet, that's telling of who's writing this. The person writing this is a physician. So the fact that he's telling exactly what the ailment was, he doesn't just say, "Oh yeah, he was lame and then he jumped up." He's telling you physically what was wrong with him. And that's because he's a physician. Verse 8, and he, leaping up, stood and walked and entered with them into the temple, walking and leaping and praising God. This is beautiful because he wasn't praising Peter. When he said Jesus of Nazareth, in the name of Jesus of Nazareth, that man knew what that meant. So he's praising God. So that's a beautiful thing. But here's the thing that's kind of strange when you think about somebody who had been lame from birth. Walking is a skill. Little children, think how long it takes, even when they're standing up, to learn how to walk. Or somebody who's been in an accident and they can't walk. They have to go to rehab to learn how to walk. This guy never walked a day in his life. That's part of the miracle, that he could walk immediately and then he could jump. He was leaping. This guy was happy.
Yes.
And all the people saw him walking and praising God, and they knew that it was he which sat for alms at the beautiful gate of the temple. Everybody realized that this was a miracle. And you remember that when Jesus healed the blind man, the Pharisees are like, "We better get his parents here because we don't know if this is a guy that was really blind." But these people believe it. And they knew that it was he which sat at alms at the beautiful gate of the temple. And they were filled with wonder and amazement at that which had happened unto him. And as a lame man which was healed, held Peter and John, all the people ran together unto them in the porch that is called Solomon's, greatly wondering. So he is holding on to these guys. These are the guys that God used, and he is like, yes, I'm walking into this temple for the first time in my life. Yes, he sat there and begged, and now he can participate. And not only that, once you go through that gate, there are 15 steps. So he had to be a good walker to get up to the main temple. 15 steps. And he was able to do that. Okay, that's going to be my lesson for tonight. And then next week, we are going to talk about when all these people gather together, Peter teaches them. That's what he's supposed to do, teach in Jerusalem. And that's exactly what he's doing here.